Good afternoon. This is your science lesson 5. Can I investigate microorganisms? You may have heard that word before. I have my lab coat on today, so there's going to be an investigation involved. There are lots of different types of microorganisms which we're going to look at today. What are microorganisms first? Well, the key is in the first part of the word micro. Microorganisms are very tiny living things. They're so small that they are not visible to the naked eye. You can't actually see them unless you have a special piece of equipment called a microscope. Well, microorganisms can be found all around us. They can live on and in our bodies, in the air, in water, and on the objects around us. They can be found in almost every habitat on Earth. What are microorganisms then? Some animals and plants are microorganisms. Examples include dust mites and plankton. On the left is a magnified image of a household dust mite. On the right, magnified image of plankton. Plankton are microscopic organisms drifting in fresh or seawater. Other microorganisms are fungi, such as mold, yeast, and penicillium. Mold is the common word for any fungus that grows on food or other materials. Penicillium fungus is actually used to make an antibiotic called penicillin. Some of you may have had that if you've been unwell. Yeast is a microscopic fungus that can be used to raise bread dough. What happens is as the yeast consumes the sugars in the dough, they give off a waste gas called carbon dioxide, and this gas is what you find in your bread when you see those little gaps, those holes. That's where the gas has been given off by the yeast, which caused the bread to rise. Now, bacteria are single-celled microorganisms. Bacteria are found in diverse habitats all over the earth. So you'll find bacteria in so many different places. That's why it's really important to be clean and keep, for your parents to keep your house clean as well, because you have the bacteria, microorganisms, you can't see them. So you've got to keep things clean. This image was produced by a scanning electron microscope, very powerful microscope. It shows a clump of what's called Staphylococcus epidermidis bacteria that is typically found growing on human skin. Well, don't be too afraid. It's usually harmless. Now here we have different type of microorganism. Sometimes viruses are called microorganisms. There's some debate as to whether they're actually really alive or not, because of complex reasons related to things that they can or can't necessarily do. But viruses are infectious agents, and they can replicate only inside the cells of living things. So scientists disagree on whether or not to call viruses microorganisms. In this lesson, we'll consider them to be unusual microorganisms. And of course, you need powerful pieces of equipment to see them. In this example, a very powerful microscope shows the influenza, which is the flu virus. If this gets into your body, it could cause you to have the flu. And of course, what has affected all of our lives across the whole world in the past year is coronavirus. This image shows what the coronavirus could look like. You can see these, they're called spikes on the outside of the virus. And it's that, as it attaches to your own body cells, that is how it uses your own body cells to replicate itself. So viruses are incredibly clever, but of course they are incredibly harmful, and particularly with coronavirus at the moment, causing so much harm to people, making people very unwell, and unfortunately taking many people's lives as well. But there is hope, of course, always with the use of vaccines, very clever vaccines, which use information from the virus to actually help your body to protect itself. Those are what are on their way as we speak and are helping to protect people so that if the coronavirus were to get into their body and your body and our body and everybody's body will know exactly what to do to protect itself against coronavirus. So a vaccine, which you will have heard of in the news, is an incredibly clever way of combating, defeating viruses. Or rather, should I say, helping us as humans to have the upper hand in the battle against them. So helpful or harmful? Well, certainly in the case of coronavirus, incredibly harmful. Some microorganisms, though, can be helpful in certain situations, and others can be harmful and their spread needs to be controlled or contained. Let's look at some examples. Starting from the top left, bacteria are actually used to ferment milk as part of the cheese making process. So this is particularly evident in blue cheese, and we can actually see the results of the bacteria on the cheese itself. Yeast ferments the carbohydrates found in grapes to make alcoholic wine, and yeast is used for making a beer also as well, and other alcoholic drinks too. Yogurt is made using milk that has been soured by bacteria. Bottom left, yeast is added to bread dough to make it rise. That's where I mentioned earlier, the yeast starts to eat the carbohydrate, and the waste that it gives off, carbon dioxide gas, causes the little holes in the bread. Microorganisms feed on leaves, plants, and other matter, decomposing it and creating compost. So you may have seen in the allotment I have a compost corner, and we put leaves and plants and all kinds of matter onto the pile. These microorganisms feed on that, and the waste that they give off creates the compost. So it's a way of recycling and renewing energy. Very useful, because then that compost can then be used again to help new plants grow. Antibiotics are used to kill bacteria that cause infections, and they're created from fungi such as penicillin. So antibiotics kill bacteria. Antibiotics can't be used for a virus though. So if you've got a virus, you can't have antibiotics because they can't kill viruses. Now let's have a look at some examples of the effect on us then. Well, food poisoning can be caused by bacteria that grow on uncooked or undercooked food. These two words we've heard before. Uncooked means not cooked at all. Undercooked means that it's still raw in the middle. So the classic example would be for chicken. Chicken can look cooked on the outside where it's turned white, but it can actually be raw on the inside. Now that is incredibly dangerous. Chicken carries bugs such as E. coli, salmonella, and if it's not cooked properly, then it can actually cause a lot of harm. And also important for you to know, and also for your parents to be reminded of as well, all of us to be reminded of, is to thoroughly clean all surfaces once the meat's touched the chopping boards, knives, things like that. So if you give them the clean hot water and hot soapy water will kill those bugs and stop them from harming us. And of course, cooking food properly. Now, chickenpox, which many of us will have had, I had that too. Chickenpox is caused by a virus and it spreads very easily. The influenza flu virus causes flu symptoms such as a headache and a fever. What's happening here is your body's trying to make an environment where it's hostile to the bug, so it raises your temperature. Makes you feel very unwell though. Bottom left, something called athlete's foot. Doesn't mean only athletes get it. It's called athlete's foot. It's caused by a fungus that grows between the toes. This one here, really important, because this is something we should be doing, brushing our teeth. Plaque on our teeth is formed when bacteria in the mouth combine with small food particles. So if you've eaten a meal, you will have food left over in your mouth, because that's natural. But what happens is bacteria that's in your mouth feeds on that, and eventually causes something called plaque. So what's the best way to protect your teeth and your oral health? Well, brush your teeth at least twice a day. It's recommended. And on the bottom right, the fungi that grow on food are called molds. Now, mold can make you ill if you eat it. So you may have seen moldy bread in the cupboard. Me too. You shouldn't be eating that. So what makes mold grow? Well, mold is the name for the types of fungi that grow on food. Well, it's useful to know what makes mold grow so that we can stop it happening as fast and keep our food fresher for longer, and that saves waste too. I would like you to, in your investigation today, investigate the conditions that cause mold to grow. What I would like you to use are 2 slices of bread and 2 clear plastic bags. You could use cling film as well, anything that wraps up the bread. What I'd like you to do is change the conditions that each slice of bread are exposed to over a week. So for example, you might place 1 slice of bread in the light and 1 in the dark. You might place 1 in the fridge and 1 over a radiator at home or somewhere warm at home. You may choose to dampen 1 slice of bread before putting it in the bag. You don't have to soak it so that it's dripping wet, just dampen it, see what happens, and leave the other one dry. It's over to you. So, your task is a mold investigation, leaving it quite open to you. Decide which variable you'll change. Use this variable to come up with your question. In your patch, you'll have a sheet like this to help you to structure your investigation. For example, if you're changing the dampness of the bread, your question may be, does damp bread go moldy faster than dry bread? Like I've said, the sheet will help you. I'd like you to observe it over the course of a week. What happens? Just a reminder on variables. The independent variable is what you're going to change. So think about that in this investigation. The dependent variable is what you're going to measure. So what are we actually looking for? Well, it might be the growth of mold over time. Your controlled variables are what you're going to keep the same. What you're going to keep the same about the both of them. Could be the same bread packet, comes from the same loaf. The sizes could be the same, could be placed in the same size bag and kept in the same area. 1 in a warm place, 1 in a cool place, for example, and you're not going to change either of those during the investigation. So think carefully about your variables. This is top level, year 6 level investigation, this. And this is partly why I've left it over to you to design your own. Now you can do it with 2 slices of bread, but you might use 1 cut in half or 1 cut in quarters. I will leave it up to you. And some safety points as well. We talked about how microorganisms can be harmful. Well, you need to have an adult supervise activities that involve the moldy bread. So once the investigation is done with later on in the week, do not handle it yourself. And certainly do not eat it, because we talked about how they can be harmful. I trust that you understand what you need to do with your investigation. If you need any support in setting up your investigation, always here to help you. Goodbye.